Dr. Araujo, I think he would prefer in this small gathering to be called Victor, or Vic, is that correct? Has been a Baha'i for many, many years. His particular interest and particular activity has been associated with being the representative of the International Baha'i Community at the United Nations. He's been active as a member of the Executive Committee of the non-governmental organizations at the UN and active with UNESCO. And so that having taken a leading role among the NGOs at the UN, he will be very well informed about what is happening internationally in the various organizations around the world, both Baha'i and non-Baha'i. And I think we can look forward to some very valuable information from that regard. He was born in London, but moved to Brazil, and then came to the United States and became a U.S. citizen in 1954. Educated at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and with a BA and MA and a doctorate in English literature from University of Washington in Seattle, and been a teacher of English at Flint College in Michigan, and a couple of others I see here, and has been active both locally and nationally with the Baha'i community in the United States. And that pretty well sums up what I have on this, and Vic, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Well, it's very nice indeed to be here and to see a much larger group than we had last year. I think we had half a dozen people last year in the seminar, so it's a good sign that it's growing. I thought that it might be nice to start with a quotation from the writings of Abdul Baha, in which he talks about the family as a microcosm. He says, compare the nations of the world to the members of a family. A family is a nation in miniature. Simply enlarge the circle of the household and you have the nation. Enlarge the circle of nations and you have all humanity. The conditions surrounding the family surround the nation. The happenings in the family are the happenings in the life of the nation. Would it add to the progress and advancement of a family if dissensions should arise among its members, fighting, pillaging each other, jealous and revengeful of injury, seeking selfish advantage? Nay, this would be the cause of the effacement of progress and advancement. So it is in the great family of nations, for nations are but an aggregate of families. And I think this is particularly interesting because usually people don't tend to connect what happens in the family with what happens in the world as a whole. I sat down the other day and I started thinking, that's what we all thought about, is why are we particularly interested in the family, what has happened in our lives. So I wrote down a few notes. This should be called a keynote address in progress. I originally titled it The Family, the Challenge of Unity and Diversity, or Cultural Diversity. Whatever knowledge I may have to discuss the issue of the family comes from two sources: personal experience and exposure to United Nations information, materials, and discussions. From my educational background in English literature, I could perhaps do some research and come up with a paper on the family in contemporary British literature, narrow down perhaps to British literature 1900 to 1920, 1920 to 1930, etc., or even some briefer chronological span. But that would have very little practical value in terms of looking at the family today, worldwide, its nature and quality, and how we got on, and how we go on to the year 2000 and beyond, not only preserving this basic unit of society, so recognized by the United Nations, but further strengthening it by curing many of its ills and correspondingly those of the individuals and of society. So here goes. First, from experience, I was a member of a family, half British, half Brazilian, two cultures, grew up mostly, except for language, in the Brazilian context. Left it, established my own family in the United States, another culture, still belong to the family, although two members left home and set up their own families, and am now enjoying the experience of an extended family, not as at the beginning of grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, but of daughter and son-in-law, and son and daughter-in-law, and of grandchildren. So the question is, what really keeps us all together? What makes us cohere in spite of diversity of ages, backgrounds, interests, living places, etc.? One answer at this stage of my family relationships is, of course, the common code of belief, ethics, attitudes, behavior, and ultimate goal of achieving world peace and world civilization, the Baha'i paradigm, to use a fashionable word. We are all Baha'is, some of us as our children, having grown up as Baha'is, and our grandchildren now growing up as such. Others, such as our daughter-in-law, having been raised Catholic, then Protestant, and our son-in-law Catholic. Thus, in my present extended family, as compared to the extended family which I grew up, the crucial matter of true identity of each member is perfectly clear, as is the path of struggle to achieve this true identity. This makes it possible for the evolution of family life to take a direction towards diversity and openness at the same time that it strives for closeness and unity. And this regardless of where each member lives at any given time, what he or she does in her life, the cumbersome non-sexist language we now try to use, whether communication occurs face-to-face through frequent meeting, by phone or by mail. The bond of common guidance for belief and action, for inspiration and for aspiration and action are shared. And the common commitment is both spiritual, moral, as well as intellectual and emotional. It is a commitment of the total person to development of his or her talents and qualities to the highest degree for the achievement of personal happiness, family happiness, and world happiness in harmony and peace. Such complete coherence and development of family bonds, internal and external, embracing members of the nuclear or extended family, and beyond that of humanity as a whole, was not possible as I grew up. My parents were one Catholic, one Protestant, mostly in a formal way. My grandparents, aunts, cousins, uncles were either devout or nominal Catholics. And then there were the relatives on my mother's side, whom I knew by word of mouth only. They were in England, and I grew up in Brazil, and they never came to Brazil, nor did we travel to England. I grew up nominally Protestant, and I often think it was by some fluke, probably to satisfy my mother. I was christened Presbyterian. I don't think my father cared. He was a nominal Catholic. But I grew up with no interest in religion, curious, but with a strong aversion to dwelling on sin and evil, Christ on the cross, dripping blood, Satan, and hellfire. The world of nature, the lay world, was far more pleasant to experience. Yet I had many aunts who were Catholics in depth of devotion, masses, communion, etc., something I did not understand. My family also was not truly Brazilian, my mother being English, so we were only gradually accepted into the extended family fold, diversity of nationality. Yet when I married, as a Brazilian marrying an American, both of us Baha'is, nationality did not matter to us or to the parents on either side, one side Baha'i, the other having transcended national barriers. However, as I grew up, I had no idea of what my true identity was. National, yes. Racial, yes. Even religious or non-religious, yes. But not who I really was, what my purpose in life was, unable to formulate a philosophy of life and a way of life that was so encompassing that I could forge ahead throughout the 20th and into the 21st century with understanding and actions that would lead from diversity and invariably disunity to peace and harmony. Human destruction through war, I recall, was always very vivid in my mind. So as we look at the family approaching the last decade of the 20th century and wonder how it can be healed, first, how its members can be healed, and then, as Abdu'l-Baha says, become the microcosm of the world, we must look at the variety of cultures around the world, be able to sort out the contributions that will enrich a world culture from those that have neither religious nor scientific validity any longer. And while recognizing this diversity, find a clue to restructuring this basic unit of society so that in its strength and creativity, it can serve as the basis of a healthy community, interacting with it, fostering always the individual potential as well as the cooperative spirit of all its members. I think this is the unique challenge that faces every person on the planet, and which rests ultimately on the discovery of his or her true identity and purpose in creation. Baha'u'llah has given us the key to recreating the family in a world society, and it is, I think, this vision that we must understand, apply in Baha'i families and communities, and share with the world at large. We must struggle, it is clear, to become examples of the universal family, valid in whatever culture, I'm talking about at this moment in this nuclear time, new in the relationship of the couple, of parents to children and children to parents and children with each other. We can, one, look at the basic elements of such a family, and two, point out how even in imperfect ways, the teachings of Baha'u'llah have already had their effect in creating individuals who are at the forefront and the very beginning of a new world civilization. About two years ago, the Baha'i International Community, UN Office, prepared a brief piece consisting mostly of passages from the Baha'i writings. It was the first seminar called The Family as the First Community, and it was very interesting because the title was suggested by a representative of the Fourth World Movement, basically Catholic, but concerned with the poorest of the poor in the world and very concerned with the family structure. Our piece was entitled The Family, a Baha'i Perspective, and began with a brief introduction. Quote, though most societies and cultures recognize the family as a necessary and fundamental unit, many changes are occurring to threaten its well-being and the happiness of its members. The family is a microcosm of the world, and its unity must be preserved if the unity and peace of our planet is to be realized. The Baha'i writings place great emphasis on the nobility of human beings and the importance of each person acquiring the highest qualities in order to serve his or her best interests as well as those of humanity. Therefore, in Baha'i communities worldwide, new teachings and principles bearing on the equality of men and women, the true and ultimate purpose of marriage and of family life, the relationship of members of the family to each other and to society at large, and the education of children have been accepted and are being implemented. Now, the sections that followed in this piece dealt with the unity and well-being of the family, marriage and the family, the couple, basic unit of society, equality of the sexes, the education of children, and the family as a microcosm. It's evident that this piece is only one of the many approaches we can take in sharing the unique Baha'i view on the family. It focuses on the central position and the role of the family in achieving the unity of mankind, makes the point, and this is not very popular in the secular world, of the central place of marriage as a sacred institution in building the family, even suggests that the couple, traditionally considered one of each sex, although there's some variations these days, may be the basic unit of society, pinpoints the equality of the sexes as fundamental in the recreation of the family today, touches on the education of children, the role of the mother in providing the proper guidance to those future adults, couples and parents, and sees the health of the family as a paradigm for the health of the nation and the world. If we can take a look at some of the United Nations studies on the family, and there have been many that have been done since 1980, many of them are connected, are concerned with the impact of contemporary life of the industrial civilization on the family, the changing role of women, for instance, in the family. Some are concerned with family policies, what governments can do to assist the family, to how they can, for instance, not replace what the family does, but give it assistance so that it can provide fully for the needs of its members. And these are some interesting studies in which we can see that no specific definition of this basic unit of society, the family, is tried for. In fact, one could say that the UN has attempted to describe the family as it appears in many cultures, in its many shapes. As such, it has, of course, avoided controversy. But it is dealing either, in my view, dealing either with obsolescent or obsolete religious cultures, or with increasingly permissive secular cultures. It sees the importance of the family, but will, of course, be in no position to get a handle on what will ultimately bring harmony and new creative powers to this institution. Let us look at some of the passages from the UN studies as examples of the so-called, quote-unquote, objective or progressive view, which has as its main values a widening of understanding of cultural influences on the nature of the family, as well as clearly indicating the weakening of family bonds, the stress of contemporary rural and urban civilization on the family unit. Families exist everywhere. They are vitally important, but they are succumbing to the strains underlying the building of a world culture and a world society. This, Baha'is clearly see, is going to either narrow the compass and scope of the family, providing for preservation of past values, but isolation from the mainstream of society, or is going to loosen the bonds between family members to the point of on-paper relationships or complete disintegration. Without a regenerating vision, one that restores a religious view of marriage as a divine institution, but provides a new pattern for the choice of partner, the relationship of the couple, and relationships within the family, and puts it all in the context of the local community, and this community within the framework of the national and international communities. Without the vision that Baha'u'llah has brought us, it is impossible to bring the family back to its vital function in building world unity and peace. And I think the question is, how can we assist in the event of an international year of the family, for instance, to influence widely thinking people, governments, etc., regarding the recreation of a family unit that reinforces individual action and spurs community efforts towards a sane, healthy, and harmonious world. It is all as function of Baha'i life and Baha'i teaching, I believe. And I think this is the importance of developing fully a seminar on marriage and the family, or I meant to mention to Beth that I thought that perhaps if we called it a Baha'i seminar on family, not marriage and family, would be better, because within the family, marriage is an integral part, and there are all these other elements, and it broadens the scope. It also, if eventually we want to open up the seminar to non-Baha'is, I think it's better to just focus on the family, which is accepted by everybody, rather than put the focus on marriage. We can discuss this within the context of the family. It's there. Baha'is are quite clear. It's a divine institution. We're not hiding anything. But it doesn't, at the beginning, wave the red flag, so to speak. I would like to share with you some passages from one of the UN pieces. It's a rather interesting piece called The Role of the Family in the Development Process. They have 4 of these studies. This one deals with the role of the family in the development. And under structures, they discuss the matter of family types, because I think this is important if we are going to, in the seminar, we have to take into account there are a number of family types. I mean, it's beyond the nuclear and the family and or even the extended family, but all kinds of variations. And here, they're going to say perhaps the most basic concept in social life is that of the family. Families are a universal phenomenon that all people have experienced in one way or another, regardless of age. They are a basic aspect of every society and are acknowledged to be among its most important characteristics. Having said that, there may be few other areas in which statements concerning families would enjoy universal acceptance. So it's a basic unit of society accepted in all societies. And that's why the UN has been able to move ahead, east and west, north and south, in looking at the conditions of the family. It says, regarding basic types of families, it should be noted that in formulating typologies of family, anthropologists and sociologists have long indicated that there are probably no pure family types, nor are they immutable. There is a wide variety of families which differ from place to place and over time. The differences attributable to the place of residence of the family are understood as being due to cultural, ethnic, religious, and other factors. Shifts in family type also occur over time, not only as new families are formed, but within established families as well. Because of this dynamic quality of family life, and this is in the dynamic quality of family life, regardless of its form, because of this dynamic quality of family life, any individual may find himself or herself in a variety of different family types over the course of a lifetime. Quote, one perspective on family, regardless of its form, is that it is defined primarily by reference to relationships which pertain to or arise from reproductive processes and which are regulated by law or by custom. Then they go on to say that changes in the family structure will occur as the family passes through different stages in its life cycle, which have been identified as family formation, marriage, cohabitation, family extension, pregnancy, adoption, child rearing, and family dissolution, departure of family members, divorce. In addition, changes in the family's environment, such as in the community or society, as well as changes in values, structures, or functions, and changes in familial survival strategies, can all affect family type. Furthermore, such changes may come about largely as a result of the family's reaction to external pressures and demands, or may be brought about by the family's choosing to create for itself a new mode of familial living. So you can begin to see the complexity of the whole issue. Then, as to the basic types of families. The basic types of families are described here in general terms. It is recognized that the subject has attracted considerable attention, has been a focus of many studies, and of numerous attempts at classification, and yet has still managed to elude precise definition. Illustrative of the variety of analyses that have been carried out is the work of K. Gupta, in which he cites 35 studies covering 22,500 Indian families, revealing no less than 12 types of joint family and 17 forms of nuclear family. Without delving into the permutations and combinations of family types, it can be said that typologies of family usually include the following, and they list, I'll just mention the few that they talk about. First is the extended family, which usually includes two or more nuclear families, as well as various, usually dependent kin, residing together either in the same house or in the same on the same piece of land, or in very close proximity to each other. And that's one of the points that often the developing countries make, is that they're concerned that if you start discussing families, you think of the nuclear family as it is found in industrialized countries rather than the extended family, which is prevalent in the developing world. Second is the limited or modified extended family, which tends to be more compact and smaller and includes one or possibly two nuclear families. Then three, the nuclear family, which is often seen to be the most common form of family life and consists of parents, usually married, but not necessarily. You see, this item keeps coming in, it's a cohabitation or not necessarily marriage, and their offspring. The nuclear family usually functions and resides independently of other family units which may be related to it. Then the fourth is increasingly prevalent in developed and in some developing countries is a single parent family, which consists of an adult and one or more children. This is the next one, another form of family may be a communal family in which many unrelated families may reside in the same dwelling or in close proximity to each other. F, still another form of family is the polygynous family, not the polygynous family, which in many areas of the world today remains an important aspect of familial life. There's an interesting story told by one of the Baha'is who lived in Burkina Faso for many years, and in which the story of one of the Baha'is who became a man who became a Baha'i, and a very active Baha'i, very devoted, and the family of his wife noticed that he changed his whole attitude towards his wife. He no longer maltreated his wife, he treated her very well and so forth, and they were so impressed by it, they decided that their 15-year-old daughter should also marry him. So he should marry the daughter. Now, as a Baha'i, he could not take on another wife. However, if he did not take on another wife, his present wife would leave him and go back to family. And if he did, he would be breaking the Baha'i law. So I think this is one instance where we're coming into contact with the outmoded cultural beliefs and where culture can actually be a source of injustice, really. It can become a source of injustice. But again, if we deal with the whole issue of polygamy, in many societies, and the fact that man has many wives, so in some societies the other way around, the wife can have many husbands. And finally, there are these two additional ways in which families can be described, and one they talk is the household is often used as a proxy for the family, and a lot of talk about the household, and the family-headed household, which in the case of sub-Saharan Africa may be due to rural urban migration, high divorce rates, or considerable age difference between spouses, which leads to a high rate of widowhood. You see, there are all these different elements. I don't want to go on anymore, but it's a very interesting document. And incidentally, if you're really interested in any of these these issues or any of these publications that the UN puts out, I can even tell you where to obtain them, or I can, if they're inexpensive, can mail them to you if you give me your name and address. And, there are 4 in this particular series, which is quite interesting, put out by the family unit in Vienna, the UN family unit in Vienna. Now, I'd like to do I have a few more minutes? I just wanted to talk very briefly about a document which is now being circulated at the United Nations, and which will be the subject of discussion at this present session of the UN General Assembly. Last year, the UN General Assembly decided that regarding an International Year of the Family, which some countries, particularly Poland, Greece, Portugal, and some others wanted, that the Secretary General of the United Nations, or the Secretariat of the United Nations, would send out a questionnaire to all member states, asking them for their views on whether they thought an International Year of the Family would be a good idea. And then their replies would become part of a document, a study which would be discussed then by the General Assembly at this particular session from the middle of September to the middle of December. And so this is what's happening. There are 2 possibilities. One is if the General Assembly feels that there have been about 49 replies, and you know there are 159 countries of the United Nations, so it's just about 1/3 have replied. And usually the countries that reply are the ones that are really interested in the issue. The others will not reply. That doesn't mean they may be lukewarm about it, but they may go along with the idea. And 2 things could happen. One would be simply a resolution. This is the way the UN operates, a resolution proposing the proclamation of an International Year of the Family, which probably couldn't take place any earlier than 1992 because several years are needed for preparation. And the other one would simply, if there's not enough interest or enough agreement, simply postponing the issue by saying, all right, we would like to find out what kind of activity should be involved in an International Year of the Family, how much it would cost, and so forth, what the UN calls financial implications. Since, you know, the UN is broke these days, that becomes a very important matter. How much is this going to cost, you know, if we have an International Year of Family? Can it be done within the framework of the present services at the United Nations, or does it require more? So then there would be a resolution proposing that this be sent back to the Commission for Social Development, which meets in Vienna, this is where it all started, meets in Vienna next February to look into this matter, to make proposals, to look into how much it would cost and what the purposes were and so forth, all the details, and that would be passed on in good UN bureaucratic fashion to the Economic and Social Council, which meets in the spring, then ultimately go to the General Assembly next year for a decision. The likelihood is that the matter is not going to be dropped. Certainly, if finally an International Year of the Family does not come about, to put focus on the family, create a great awareness of the family's needs and how government policies can assist. If this does not happen, then the studies of the UN will continue. The interest in the family will continue. It's not going to do away with the whole issue because there is enough interest in having the UN help governments deal with this issue of the family, which they find is a very significant issue in all countries. But this is rather interesting. This report. I'll just share with you a few of the comments that the government made. A large majority of responding governments, 39 out of 45, a total of 45, favor the United Nations International Year of the Family. One government had no objections to such a year, provided that it was conducted according to ECOSOC, that is Economic and Social Council guidelines, and required no additional funding. Another government expressed doubts as to the usefulness of such a year, and one wished to defer a decision pending exploration of alternatives. 3 governments did not favor an international year. Of these, one proposed an alternative course of action. And these are some of the comments. Governments indicated that families, as the basic unit of society, are beset by a wide variety of problems that have had negative effects on familial structures and functions, resulting in a long-term weakening of families. This has diminished their ability to support and care for family members, especially dependent members, as well as their effective contribution to development. See, it affects the whole life of the nation. Governments identified a number of problems: the inability of many families to provide the necessary support to their members, especially children, the aging and disabled, family instability, the need for more child care facilities, the inadequacy of support services in general, including social security provisions, and lack of programs which prepared young people for family responsibility. Reference was made to a number of trends affecting the family as an institution, such as increases in common law or de facto unions, dissolution of families, single-parent families, especially those headed by mothers, and teenage pregnancy. Birth rates in some cases were considered as either too high or too low. Among problems internal to families, specific reference was made to infidelity, polygamy, conjugal conflicts, violence in the family, child abuse, and incest. Alcoholism, drug abuse, mental illness, juvenile delinquency and crime, and child labor, as related to the situation of families, were also mentioned. Governments also pointed to a number of broad social and economic issues which exacerbate the situation, including poverty, unemployment, urbanization, industrialization, lack of education, illiteracy, poor health and nutrition, inadequate housing, degradation of the environment, low productivity, and landlessness. Reference was also made to the rapid change of values associated with the effects of advertising and the mass media. Mention was made of the special problems confronting families of migrant workers and refugee families, as well as families living in the occupied Palestinian and other Arab territories and under apartheid. I read that because I think it gives you an idea that there's a lot of concern with what's going on in the problems of the family by member states. And they are not blind to these problems, and they see the need to resolve these problems. And it seems to me there are tremendous opportunities, therefore, for Baha'i communities everywhere at grassroots levels to really get involved in this particular issue. And this particular issue can become a source of enlightenment for the community outside the Baha'i community, and can be of assistance to government, the Baha'i point of view, and Baha'is that are specifically involved in the area of the family, social work, and psychiatry, psychology, and counseling, all kinds of areas, and the Baha'is that are particularly concerned with the issue of equality of men and women, that's another one. Can use this opportunity to be of service in a number of ways. And that reminds me of what a member of the House of Justice, Mr. Glenford Mitchell, recently mentioned, that really, as Baha'is, that we do not want to be known as evangelists, but we want to be known as people that provide service to humanity, service to others. And that is teaching. That is the way that we can teach if we offer it in the spirit of service. So this study is a very interesting one. It's one particular comment from a government that welcomed an international year. Since family structures, traditions, and values differed so markedly from place to place, according to this government, it did not seem likely that international consultations would result in widely applicable international measures to strengthen family life. That's it's very interesting, because when we have Baha'i international consultations, we can provide for unity and diversity. We can have, we can reach at measures that will strengthen family life or anything else, and yet we're coming from all kinds of different backgrounds and cultures, and this is the point of unity. I would like to conclude with a few of the sharing with you to get us back on the Baha'i track. With some of the, if I can find the some of the comments, some of the passages from Baha'i writings that we used in this installation. When we talked about unity and the well-being of the family, and you're familiar, I'm sure, with these quotations there. All of them were really taken from that booklet, Marriage and Family Life. Some of them we edited, because sometimes you have to take out, without altering the meaning of the passage. There's certain, when you refer references to the guardian or beloved guardian or something like that, that is not understandable. Or so these were simply accepted without changing the. On the unity and the well-being of the family. If love and agreement are manifest, a single family, that family will advance, become illumined and spiritual. But if enmity and hatred exist within it, destruction and dispersion are inevitable. How easily, where unity existeth in a given family, the affairs of that family are conducted, what progress the members of that family make, how they prosper in the world, their concerns are in order, they enjoy comfort and tranquility, they are secure, their position is assured, they come to be envied by all. Such a family but addeth with stature and is lasting honor, as day succeedeth day. And then it is one of the essential teachings of the Baha'i faith that unity should be maintained in the home. And then this one, the relationship between husband and wife must be viewed in the context of the Baha'i ideal of family life. Baha'u'llah came to bring unity to the world, and a fundamental unity is that of the family. Therefore, one must believe that the Baha'i faith is intended to strengthen the family, not weaken it. And one of the keys to the strengthening of unity is loving consultation. The atmosphere within a Baha'i family is within the community as a whole should express, quote, not dictatorial authority, but humble fellowship, not arbitrary power, but the spirit of frank and loving consultation. Then again, on consultation, in any group, however loving the consultation, there are nevertheless points on which, from time to time, agreement cannot be reached. There can, however, be no majority where only two parties are involved, as in the case of a husband and wife. There are, therefore, times when a wife should defer to the husband and times when a husband should defer to his wife. But neither should ever unjustly dominate the other. Somehow there's a tremendous wisdom that you see at every turn in this passage from the writings, you know, and all the questions are answered. And then there are all relationships within the family, but there is a much wider sphere of relationship between men and women than in the home. For example, although the mother is the first educator of the child and the most formative influence in his development, the father also has the responsibility of educating his child. Similarly, although the primary responsibility for supporting the family financially is placed upon the husband, this does not by any means imply that the place of women is confined to the home. Then we mentioned that the family is a very special kind of community. The members of a family all have duties and responsibilities towards one another and to the family as a whole. And these duties and responsibilities vary from member to member because of their natural relationships. And this is very interesting because the UNICEF the UN is finishing a convention on the rights of the child. And this should be done ready by the fall of next year. It's approved by the fall of next year. And it's unique because for the first time in this convention, children have rights. They have rights to have they have a right to have their views heard and respected. They have rights to choose their own religion and so forth. In the light of the Baha'i faith, this is absolutely fascinating, because this is the spirit of the times that is being reflected in a UN instrument now. The parents have the inescapable duty to educate their children, but not vice versa. The children have the duty to obey their parents. The parents do not obey the children. The mother, not the father, bears the children, nurses them in babyhood, and is thus their first educator. Hence, daughters have a prior right to education over sons. The training which a child first receives through his mother constitutes the strongest foundation for his future development. A corollary of this responsibility of the mother is her right to be supported by her husband. A husband has no explicit right to be supported by his wife. Very interesting. Then another one, according to the family being a human unit, must be educated according to the rules of sanctity. You're aware of that statement. Second section was marriage and the family, the couple, basic unit of society. This clear statement, marriage is a very sacred institution. Baha'u'llah says its purpose is to promote unity. I haven't seen it too often. The life of a married couple should resemble a life of unity and concord, a friendship both mental or physical. The home should be orderly and well organized. They should always be elated with joy and gladness and be a source of happiness to the hearts of others. They should set an example to their fellow men, manifest true and sincere love towards each other, and educate their children in such a manner as to blazon the fame and glory of their family. Right, interesting. And then three passages which you're very familiar with. The equality of the sexes. Humanity is like a bird with two wings. Women have equal rights with men upon the earth. Women's lack of progress has been due to her need of equal education opportunity, and what will happen when women there is true equality of the sexes. Then a section on the education of children, beginning with the question of goodly character as the first importance. It is incumbent upon every father and mother to counsel their children over a long period and guide them into those things which lead to everlasting honor. Then the mother being the first educator of the child, and to put forth effort in that way. And it says that the first teacher of the child as the mother should not be startling, for the primary orientation of the infant is to its mother. This provision of nature in no way minimizes the role of the father in the Baha'i family. Again, equality of status does not mean identity of function. And I think this is very important to understand. And train these children with divine exhortations. Teach them to free themselves from human imperfections and to acquire the divine perfections. Therefore, make an effort in order that these children may be rightly trained and educated, and that each one of them may attain perfection in the world of humanity. And finally, the child must not be oppressed or censored because it is undeveloped. It must be patiently trained. And the final three passages deal with the family as a microcosm. Any discord and dissension in the family is harmful. Then reflect upon the favors and blessings which depend upon the family when unity exists among its various members. What incalculable benefits and blessings would descend upon the great human family if unity and brotherhood were established. So thanks very much. I want to tell you that if there is any way of duplicating this, you're most welcome if we could have it duplicated here, make copies available to everyone. Oh, thanks again.
I'd like to thank you for sending us on the path today with so much material that I think we could spend, the next year just trying to digest and plan with that. And it gives us hope, I think, that if we can get our act together, we can do better than the United Nations bureaucracy, I hope.
Oh, I hope so. I mean, there was no hope for the faith.
Maybe there's some guidance in this, that as they are delaying and wavering, we've got the answer, and all we have to do is get ourselves geared up to get on with spreading the information about the Baha'i view of the family. So thank you very much, and we'll carry on with that discussion, I'm sure, later in the day. Coffee is here, if you'd like to take a 15-minute break, and then on with the next part of our program. Take a 15-minute break, and then on with the next part of our program.
Sylvia will go with them, all right? You see, I am short-tempered at times, and I had my fill with social services in Milwaukee. Okay, I'll put it that way. And so I am not good at that. She will go, all right? She will walk through it, but I'll do the imagery and the phone calling for setting it up and like that. But the imagery is real important because you're giving them rehearsal over. And if you read the literature on that, what happens? The brain responds to covert, right? You know, just as it does to overt. And so what you're doing, you're giving practice. And also, you're doing something else. Here we go again. Is you're creating more reason for what? Positive self-esteem. You've got a gift. You've got a capacity. You've got potential. All right, let me show you how you can do that. And it's very exciting for me. Real exciting. What I do with them, though, I'll go to an M2 meeting, and I deal with school psychologists and like that and social workers. I will do that periodically as my time allows. Okay, because we have a lot of people who will get a report, and they don't know, or they'll say, I didn't know what they were talking about. And we say, why didn't you ask? Well, I don't want to look stupid. You know, I say, well, I'll go in there sometime, and I don't know what they're talking about. All right? You know, so you have to ask. That's the only way. So we'll work things out like that with them. Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
That's like, for example, the last 8 years has been musical for
Yes, I do. Yes. All right. And I'm telling you, I'm seeing more. See, during Reconstruction, I don't know how many of you are real familiar with Black history, but during Reconstruction, there was a tremendous amount of chaos, right? People disorganization. It was the Black church, right? The Black church that became the socio-political force in the Black community. Well, see, it's in my view that this whole process of assimilation, you know, so many of us have stepped away from that set of roots, that the church became weak in terms of its socio-political impact. Now there's a return to that. You can read articles on upwardly mobile corporate Black who now is going to church to pray, but also to have that context in which he or she can feel a part of the group of origin, huh? All right, and to have an impact. St. Mark's AME Church, which is one of the prestigious Black churches in Milwaukee, has, in fact, they came to our program last time. We got ours off the ground, you know, and we're working along with them. All right, it's real exciting to see this happening, where they want to do more and more and more in the community. And by the way, our Women's Center is not only Black. We cater to all women in families, okay? We've got a number of Hispanic women and a number of white women. Let me just let you chuckle with this, but it's predominantly Black. But a young white woman came to a group one night, and she had a little baby, and she sat down, and there was a permanent Black woman in the group, and she was telling her story. And one Black woman turned around and said, if I wasn't looking at her, I'd think she was Black. And it was beautiful because the way she saw white people in general was that they didn't have somebody beating them and taking their money and, you know, putting them out in like that. And here's this young woman, she sang and she began to cry, you know, and you know, it was just really a beautiful experience to watch the kind of sharing, you know, and then they told her the process for the DA, and, you know, we've had a female police officer come in with this new domestic violence ordinance in Milwaukee, And she's talked to us, and so we always have a hookup there. You know, we can call her and say, you need to go and talk. So the women helped her set it up so that she can get the, what is it, court injunction? Yeah, the restraining order. Yeah, and like that. And it was a real, you know, good experience. So, yes, hope. All right, and as I'm saying, it's documented throughout here. All right? In fact, the last paragraph in the overview of Black America 1986 says that. Okay, Jacobs, the president of the Urban League, said that. He says that we are entering an era of hope for Black America, where Black Americans are going to be helping Black Americans. All right, and I think that's exciting. All right, exciting. It's channeling anger. All right, I don't think you can live here in America and not get angry sometimes about what you see. All right, and I would tell my colleagues that at Waupun, because you stop telling these men to stop being angry. Teach them how to channel it. All right? You cannot have a discerning human being living, a discerning black male, living in this country who's looking around and not get angry. You see, you stop telling him to get rid of his anger. Teach him how to channel it in an appropriate way, a functional way. All right? Stop robbing, killing, raping. All right? But learn to channel your anger. Okay? And I think that's important. That's an important message that we as health service providers need to give. I do run on, don't I? I saw a hand back there. I did.
Let me just say something. Thanks for the plug, but I'd like to say to the participants today that, as you mentioned, this year the National Urban League publishes the State of Black America, and we do have copies here in Madison, and we can certainly order however many you want. And if any of you would be interested in getting on a mailing list so that you know when it's coming out, it's in February or March, I think. We'd certainly be glad to distribute that copy.
Yes, it's just excellent. All right, it's absolutely excellent. And I've chosen a passage to share with you today. And you're taking notes about, you know, the figures. Maybe you want to get your pencils. But this is the result of Billingsley, a black social psychologist that does a great deal of writing about black families, and he's talking about the elements of the black family crisis, and I just like to go through this because it's so eloquently written and it's chock full of information. He says, what then are those major trends which define the crisis of black family life? Prominent among them, first, poverty is once again a prominent feature of Afro-American family life, effectively undercutting the struggle for stability. The poverty rate declined dramatically during the decade of the 60s from a high of 55% of all Afro-American families in 1959 to a low of 32% by 1970. It inched down to a 31% by 1980, then shot up dramatically to 36% by 1982, before easing back to 34% by 1984 and 31% in 1985. Among the black population, poverty had come to rest most heavily on black women and children in the major cities of our nation. Item 2, unemployment continues to plague the black family. Among black men, women, and youth, unemployment has reached disastrous levels not experienced in the general community since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Among black men, unemployment declined dramatically during the 1960s from a high of 9.6% in 1960 to a low of 3.7% by the end of that decade. Then it soared to 11.3% by 1980 and to 18.9% in 1982, the highest in post-war history. In 1985, the third year of economic recovery after the recession, the official unemployment rate for black Americans was 15%. Actual unemployment, including so-called discouraged workers, was even higher. Among black women, unemployment declined from 8.3% in 1960 to 5.8% by the end of the decade. Then it climbed to 11% by 1980 and 17.6% by 1983, before declining to 13% in 1985. Among black youth, unemployment has been even more devastating, from a high of 24.4% in 1960 unemployment in this group actually fluctuated upward and landed back at 24% by the end of the decade, before soaring again to a high of 35.4% in 1980 and an astronomical 40% by 1982, which remained steady through 1985. Now, if any of you are working with young black adolescent males, you can understand, and I had the brothers explain it to me. I mean, it's really interesting that when they expect to fail, all right, it becomes almost like, well, what's the deal? Why should I try? All right? There's nothing out there for me. All right? And very often when that's said, it is not meant that I don't want to try. It's the belief that based upon past failure, all right, and the prospect, okay, a future failure, that leaves them sort of like in the show box again, right? And you need to learn how to assess that and talk with them about it. Right? And it's very difficult to do when the prospects are pretty mean, out there in terms of job prospects. You see, I think black businessmen and white businessmen as well, men and women, are going to have the opportunity to make an impact on that in terms of hiring, and becoming a part of an advocacy within their companies to hire disadvantaged youth. As a consequence, there are hundreds of thousands of black youth between 18 and 25 years of age who have never had a full-time job and are destined never to have one. When the discouraged workers are considered, the number out of work nearly doubles. And now you may be familiar with the term the underclass, right? That was I can't remember the guy's name, but it will come to me here. That was coined by one of the Urban League's our social scientists that does work for them in their state of Black America. And that's something that's very frightening, all right, is that there's going to, there's a prediction that there can be a permanent underclass. All right, and if you look at these young black males who are the discouraged workers, you can see that. All right, that if there are no job opportunities for them, then you will have. And by the way, do you know now that for SSI you can get on SSI if you're considered a habitual criminal? Are you familiar with that? I found that astounding. Yes, you can. A habitual criminal. All right. And see, to me, that's strategically creative, feeding into that permanent underclass. You see, a lot of people will go for that 474 months, right? You understand what I'm saying? As opposed to not having anything at all. All right. But 474 months, how can, it's problematic. Okay. Low family income among employed blacks continues its downward drift. Earning about 55% of the median income of white families in 1960, black families witnessed a modest increase to 60% in 1970 and 62% by 1975. The median income took a nosedive to 58% by 1980 and then to 55% by 1982 and to 56% by 1985. Yet, black families must function in the same economic market as white families, which cap the white family income. Meanwhile, since 1980, the gap between the lowest 2/5 of the earning distribution and the highest 2/5 has widened, still further in favor of upper income families. Okay? Family structure has undergone dramatic changes in recent years. Of all the changes in black family life during the past 2 decades, changes in family structure have been the most extensive and have had the most far-reaching consequences on black children. The nuclear family has continued to lose ground under the combined assault of external and internal forces. Okay, now let me just interject something here, which is my personal bias. While I understand that 2 heads may be better than one, sometimes 1 head, okay, can do just fine. All right, and that's why when I hear people talking about the demise of the nuclear family, whether they are making reference to black families or white families, I'd like to suggest to them that they need to quit bemoaning what was and pay attention to what is right now and to buttress single-parent families, household families, rather than consistently trying to compare them with the traditional family type. You see, it's a waste of energy, in my opinion. And I get real upset with folks who do that because there are a lot of factors that are operating within this socioeconomic context that are creating more and more single-parent female-head household families. And we need to be about strengthening them rather than talking about why aren't you in the traditional family. Okay. Married couples, which accounted for the overwhelming majority of black families in 1960, which was 78%, declined dramatically to 68% by the end of the decade, and even more dramatically to 54% by 1980. Now they are a bare majority of 53%, of black families. During the 1960s, when the economy was growing, single female head of household families accounted for only 22% of all black families. That figure climbed to 27% by the end of the decade, into an astronomical 42% by 1980, 43% by 82, 44% by 85. This dramatic increase can be attributed to the ever-increasing divorce rate. All right, and this is something that is overlooked. Most of the time when you hear people talk about female head of household families, what are they almost always talking about? Teenage pregnancy, right? But no, that's not the point. And in the State of Black America in 1986, there's a whole section on that, where the major contribution to the female head of household family comes from divorce. Okay, not teenage pregnancy, divorce. Okay, and of course, black people's divorce rate is twice as high as white Americans. Okay, and white Americans is high. All right. This dramatic increase can be attributed to the ever-increasing divorce rate, separation, early death of black men, okay, keep that in mind, and rate of unmarried parenthood. The impact of these structural changes in family on the well-being of black children has been a major focus of scholarly research and public policy debate during the past 2 decades. In fact, a number of the readings that I have on here, this list for you, the more current, and I've got a current ones, and I've got ones that have some not so current. But there is a lot of debate, all right, about this whole matter of what black women are going to do about men in general, because we're supposed to be a black man, and like that. And so, of course, we're men, actually, in this country, so we are told. But you will enjoy reading, I'm sure. Nathan Hare's book is an excellent one. You probably it raises your ire, but you will learn a lot. Teenage pregnancy is a major problem in the black community. Teenage parenthood among black families has been described as epidemic, while the actual rate of births to unmarried teenagers has declined from a high of 96.9 per thousand teenagers in 1987 to 87 per thousand in 1982, the rate is still enormously high. If it continues, the majority of black women will become pregnant before their 20th birthday. Most will be unmarried. The black underclass continues to grow, due in part to extensive poverty, unemployment, and family instability. An examination of the 100 cities with the largest black population shows that the problem is pervasive. Let me just tell you this. I just got some new teeth, okay? And I'm struggling this morning to speak with them, so if I slur, please forgive me, all right? Okay. Composed of those families and individuals at the bottom of the economic and social scale, perhaps a third of all black families, this sector of the population experiences an enormous portion of suffering. Inadequate housing in the black community, homelessness and inadequate housing became scandals in all of the major cities of the nation in the 1980s, with black families overrepresented in this systemic deprivation. The goal initiated by Congress in 1949 of a decent home and suitable living environment for every American family was as laudable as its implementation has been lamentable. While some progress has been made on housing equality and housing discrimination, both matters remain unfinished national agenda items. More profound still, however, is the matter of housing affordability. According to economist Wilhelm Lee, affordability has become the key housing issue of the 70s and 80s. Even families with jobs and modest income are required to pay more than 40% of their earnings for housing. They are clearly in a state of severe housing deprivation. By 1986, homelessness had moved from a personal and family tragedy to a national scandal as characterized by the Catholic bishops of Maryland. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, the pastoral letter from the Catholic bishops. Actually, they embraced the Urban League agenda, the 5-year plan. So many of the recommendations that were made by these bishops were very similar to the 5-year plan of the Reconstruction of Black communities that is laid out by the Urban League. Black American families suffer greater health hazards and receive less adequate health care. The healthcare system has a major and unequal impact on Black families. In 1983, only 41.1% of Blacks who received healthcare received it from a private physician in his or her office, while 26.5% received healthcare in a hospital emergency room and 9.7% in the outpatient clinics. Among white patients who received healthcare, 57% received it from private physicians, 13% from emergency rooms, and 15% from outpatient clinics. Thus, Blacks and low-income people of all races rely on emergency rooms and outpatient clinics more and use doctors' offices and the telephone less. And that's actually very real. I see that in the women and also in the corrections clients that I've provided service to over the years, that they're more prone. And that fits the what? The crisis center lifestyle that we talked about, right? Preventative measures are basically not a part of the day-to-day process. It is striking to note, however, that the above picture represents considerable improvement for Black and low-income families after the introduction of Medicaid and Medicare in 1965. In 1964, for example, 3.6% of Blacks and 4.7% of whites made visits to physicians. By 1980, the proportions were almost even at 4.6% of Blacks and 4.8% of whites. The races began to diverge slightly, again, however, after 1980, such that by 1983, the proportions were 4.8% of Blacks and 5.1% of whites. How about if we take a break, as I promised, at 10:45? Thank you so much.
When do you want us back?
I'd like you back in 10 minutes. The final segment of Billingsley, because there are some other pieces of data that are particularly interesting, actually. All right, and so I would like to share these with you. All right, Black students are again dropping out of school in alarming numbers. One of the untold stories of progress during the 1960s and 1970s is the extent to which Black youth and their families took advantage of the openings in educational opportunities wrought in part by 100 years of struggle. Black youth stayed in high school in record numbers. In 1960, for example, only 6% of all high school students in the nation were Black, though Blacks constituted about 12% of school-age population. By 1981, this had increased dramatically to 10%, within striking distance of closing the gap. By 1981, Black adults had a median of 12.1 years of schooling, or the equivalent of a high school education, which was only half a year behind the median educational level of white adults. After 1980, however, regression set in. In many cities, the Black high school dropout rate is now well over 50%. College enrollment has dropped dramatically, particularly among Black men who are outnumbered by Black women in college by more than 100,000. Okay? A Black warehouse. More young Black men are in federal, state, and local prisons than are in college, and it costs the government more than 3 times as much to keep them there. We must explore and solve this critical problem. Actually, we've got, in this country, there are about 500,000 people in federal, state, or, county jail, prisons or jails, and 47% of them are Black Americans. The military, the Black employer of last resort, which is an interesting statement. Black men enlist and re-enlist in all branches of the services in such numbers that they now constitute 20% of all armed services personnel. However, they are grossly underrepresented in the officer corps. All right, officer corps. The black family continues to achieve despite overwhelming odds. Finally, despite all the odds, the majority of black families manage to avoid poverty and deprivation. A majority of blacks live within the family structure. Husbands, wives, families earn distinctly above the poverty level. A third of black families has reached middle-class status. Now that's important to keep in mind. Very often, when I do workshops, people have trouble accepting that, you know. They have trouble accepting that they are middle-class and very affluent black people, you know. And it's amazing to me. And they say, well, but how many are there? And I'll say, well, it's about a third, you know, of black people who earn, I think it was $35,000 a year. That's the way Billingsley and those define it. But most people, in terms of processing black people, they almost always will see us as low income or near poverty and like that. But you have very, very, very affluent black people in this country. Many black people get upset with Bill Cosby, I think. I heard him debate this issue before, because his show is about an upper-class black family. Well, I think it's time, huh? You know, it's time. It conveys a different type of struggle, all right? A different type of black struggle, because you do not leave behind your blackness when you become middle class. All right. Married couple families where both partners are educated and in the labor force have made substantial progress. Married couple families with 2 or more working adults, who constitute a third of all black families, had median incomes of 70% of similar white family incomes in 1969. This had increased to 80% by 1982. Educational, occupational, and geographic mobility helped to account for these trends. Even in the late 1980s, at the height of concern about the growing underclass and the simultaneous growth of the middle class, there is a general recognition that achieving black families are in all socioeconomic groups. Even in the midst of the worst conditions in the inner city, achieving families seem to rise out of the ash heaps of history and contemporary conditions to develop high levels of family stability and capacities to meet the needs of their children for economic support, for nurturance, and for guidance. These, then, are the major trends which help to describe black American family life in the 1980s. Rising levels of poverty, declining levels of income, rising levels of unemployment, declining levels of family stability, a rising underclass, a struggling middle class, and a strong element of achieving families. These are the conditions of family life for America's largest minority, fully a century and a half after the Emancipation Proclamation, a half century after the New Deal and the Fair Deal, a quarter century after the onset of the New Frontier, the Great Society, and the most successful civil rights movement in history, a decade after the 9 Neglect and Watergate, and 6 years into the Reagan Revolution. All right, so that's a part of Billingsley's article, and if you can get a hold of this book, you will find that there's just chock full of all sorts of information. But again, let me just reiterate that a third of black Americans are in the middle class category, and what's interesting here is that very often what you'll find is how black people will perceive you, all right, and I'm making a generalization here, but how they will perceive you depends more on their social class than their race, okay? Social class and race. Right? Because you will find more and more similarities in terms of, if I'm assuming that most of us in the room here are generally middle class, I'll just make that assumption, you will find that middle class blacks relate to middle class whites. You know, there's no problem in terms of a major difference. You know, you have many things in common. Right? But the problem with that is if the middle class black forgets that he's black and just sees himself as middle class. All right? Okay? Some people will say, well, why don't you leave that alone? You know, I say, I can't. All right? I see their children in therapy. I see them, all right, who are going through major identification problems. All right? You see, it's harsh reality will catch you very soon if you adorn yourself with the robes of middle-class society and really forget your blackness. All right? And you say, what does that mean? What it means is that how you process who you are will have an effect on what you expect from other people. All right? And if you are a black man or black woman here in America and think that white Americans will ever forget that, I think you are headed for problems. All right? And it's borne out over and over and over again. That's not to say, all right, that, you know, all whites are going to be racist towards you, but it's going to say to you that you cannot assume at any moment that because you have attained the accoutrements of success, you know, house in the middle class area or whatever, that somehow you have automatically become white. Because no matter where you go, just as I was in that car with my briefcase and my Dr. Martin clothes on, huh? You see, they were responding not to my car or my briefcase, they were responding to the color of my skin. Right? And that is a problem for many upwardly mobile people, black people in this country. I don't know how many of you saw the article in Chicago Tribune, all right, where they did a whole series on upwardly mobile black males who came from Cabrini Green and like that. It was just fascinating because you see, you've got a number of black clinicians around the country that are specializing in dealing with these particular people, upwardly mobile black people who are having value conflicts, okay, in terms of how they are perceiving self in the corporate world. I think I have Black Life in Corporate America on here. I hope so. I have to check. But that's an excellent book to read about this. Is that you give up basketball for golf, huh? You know, and then you are not comfortable with golf. So where do you go to be who you are? All right? In Milwaukee, you move to Whitefish Bay, Brookfield, or whatever. Okay? But one brother told me that I had to laugh. I have lots of fun with the patients, lots of clients. And he told me, he said he walks, you know, differently. You know, and he said, sometimes I just want to hang. And I just laughed because I knew what he meant, huh? You know, and I'm saying, you know, it's not that far to come and hang out with some people, okay? You may not want to bring your Mercedes, all right, and park it. Okay, now that's an interesting point. Why did you set yourself up for problems? Okay? If you understand what's happening on 3rd and Vine in Milwaukee, you will not park your Mercedes there. I don't care what color you are. You will not do that. Because you know that there are people who have been caught in the throes of helplessness and hopelessness for a long time, and your Mercedes is a symbol. All right? Doesn't mean they don't like you as a person. Okay? Or there are people who have developed the asocial or antisocial lifestyle for whatever reason, whether it's because of hopelessness or whatever. All right? But he can still come back into the community and hang out. Maybe he just walk a Mercedes out at Coles Bayshore and then catch the bus in, right? In the Milwaukee and go down and play basketball with the brothers or whatever. But my point here is that there's a tremendous amount of value conflict within the upwardly mobile black Americans. Right? Because the problem is that he or she knows that corporate vice president is unattainable. Black Life in Corporate America is an astounding fact. Where you can only get so high. Okay. They actually, yeah, you read the article too then. All right, yeah, they have a number of people, all right, around the country, black people who have moved up very high in the corporate world who eventually commit suicide. All right, because they are locked the hypothesis is that they're locked in a value conflict, and it's like they have given up a major part of self. Okay, you can talk to some people who will admit that to you. Then some who won't. Yes, ma'am.
Myself, being a mother and not being low income, and the whole thing of being really tired, finally giving up and feeling like I don't want to go to the school. Some of it is because we get so tired of having to be paranoid about people, of having to wonder, is your child not getting a good education simply because studying in the school is, or is it because it's black? And does it know anything about your family, or is this just the people who doesn't care in general? And just having to
And see, I appreciate that, okay, because what you are raising is a different set of crises, all right? A different set of crises. And the mother who has to worry about whether the child has shoes to go, all right? But it's a part of your blackness, all right? And here's the thread that runs through low income, middle income, affluent black America. All right? It's because this cultural paranoia, which was defined by Graham Cobb, 20 years ago. All right? My colleagues, we talked about that. They told me I was paranoid, and I said, thank you. Because it helps me to survive. Okay? And I'm still hanging tough. All right? Because I'm second guessing. All right? A lot of the time. And it can be tremendously tiring. And that's why you got to talk about that. All right? That's it. Come up with different strategies. It is imperative that happens, okay? And one of the problems with middle-class black Americans is that need to assimilate or belief that you should assimilate, all right, sort of leaves you out there wide open, all right? Because most of the time you don't feel you can go talk to your white counterparts about being paranoid about them, right? You see what I'm saying? I mean, sometimes you can develop some friendships that are solid enough that you can kick that back and forth, all right? Let me just digress for a moment. I had a friend, all right, a white female friend, who asked me one day about some of these issues, and she said to me, she said, if I were down in the inner city and it was a group of black people chasing after me, who would you identify with? Would you try to protect me, or would you? And see, I got pissed off that she didn't ask that question, all right? You see, because to me it was like, if you are my friend, what would make you think, okay, that I would automatically not be your friend and become part of a group of black people chasing you, all right? And so we couldn't talk about that anymore. You see what I'm saying? So we used to talk about being paranoid and all that. Then I couldn't do that. So I mean, our friendship is history, actually, right? So there are times when you can't, discuss that with people. Sometimes you can't discuss with other black people, but you need to try to generate support groups, all right? And you're right, the fatigue is phenomenal, all right? There was an article in the New York Herald about this very thing. Black families, upper middle class, who are saying to their children, I don't want you to hang out with Johnny. Okay? Did you ever read about that? Because Johnny is from other side of town, and Johnny doesn't like white people because he's angry. Alright? So I don't want you hanging with Johnny. Alright? Now these little black kids are looking at Johnny and they want to play with Johnny. Alright? But somehow they are not identifying with Johnny. Alright? They're identifying with their little white playmates. Alright? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have white friends. But those parents are making a major mistake by telling their kids that they shouldn't play with Johnny. Okay, do you know what I mean? They are, because when these kids get out here in America by themselves and they're driving down the street like Dr. Martin was, and those little kids calling, they're going to wonder, am I like Johnny? Right? Johnny and I are one. But Mama didn't tell me that, all right? And that is a cause for depression, major clinical depression. I've seen people go into deep depression about that very kind of thing. Who am I out here in America?
you're talking about cultural paranoia. Brings up something else that I was just talking to a group of workers about yesterday, actually, who wanted to do some programming at Bayview. We talked about, well, we have a 50% Hmong population at Bayview, and we talked about the cultural schizophrenia, that we can call it that, could exist in Hmong families because the parents are from one culture and the kids are Americanized and they're from another culture in some ways. And thinking if something similar would go on in a black family where are there enough changes for black children that they in some ways can't identify with what black parents had experienced.
Excellent point. There are, particularly for your upwardly mobile black families who have moved out into suburbia, all right, and daddy and mom, they go to the country club, honey, all right, and so they don't come over to the inner city very often, and so these kids, unless they're going to look at Roots on television, in fact, a lot of them haven't even seen it, all right, and like that, and so they cannot identify with the psycho-historical precedents, right, that lead up to some of these things that they experience. And so they feel that there's no such thing as racism, right? What do you mean? And then when it hits them, okay, there is no context to put that in. That's another problem of mobility, all right, in the sense that we, not only black Americans, we Americans are moving away from parents and grandparents, which were anchors in terms of giving us auditory information about our history, family history, and whatever, right? You see, with our children, they can sit and talk to grandmother, and grandmother can tell about all the things that she's been through, but she's still here. You see, she survived it. Those are things that are very, very significant that many of our children are not having the opportunity to experience. Mom and dad very often don't want, particularly if they're immersed in this process of total assimilation, they don't want to talk about how Johnny and I are one. All right? Remember Johnny was a little boy? They don't want to talk about that because with their children or to their children, because if they do that, then they have to confront some issues with themselves. Okay? I saw another hand back there. Yes. No, you have been very patient. I'm sorry.
It also raises the question that when you do maintain, there's a upper middle class black family that I know of who's in the living in a white suburbia area. So that she has her black group of friends and her tie that she's got that she's comfortable with, but she's also got the white family that she's, and how she has to learn two different cultures, has to maintain those, and the fear that's involved with that when they mix in what happens. Extra energy that it takes for a black family to maintain their older cultures and the culture they want to keep with themselves, and what kind of children that is for her. And with the kids, I don't know what kind of influence it was on them, but she has talked about her kids had the need to do that, but also how much of a struggle that parents get together and what kind of a mix is that going to be.
The issue is that they're you see, that's where, you have to get at the root of something, to get at the beliefs that go into making her feel whatever she's feeling. And it's fraught with problems. All right? But if your self-concept is not tied into how many people like you, all right, then it's less of an issue. You will feel less threatened. If this friend decides that she doesn't want to come by or whatever. The other thing, we are doing a lot of guises in order for our jobs, right? We play some roles, and we can play them, right? And so if you can set that outside of yourself, all right? And what I mean, yes, it is important for you to play